The content of the following program, including all statements from the hosts and guests, is to provide general information and commentary about the law. Under no circumstances does any statement made by the host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material from this program shall not be viewed as substitute for a personal consultation with an attorney. Now, prepare yourself to be informed and entertained by Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, two AV-rated trial lawyers who have been practicing law for a combined total of nearly 40 years. For the next 30 minutes, they will share their insight and commentary on important legal issues affecting all of us.
A lawyer is driving down a country road with his two best friends, who happen to be a rabbi and a Hindu priest. And as they're driving down this country road together, the car breaks down. Fortunately for them, it breaks down in front of an old farmhouse. So three of them walk to the farmhouse and they knock on the door, and the farmer answers, and they ask if he might happen to have room for them to spend the night. Well, the farmer turns to the lawyer, the rabbi, the Hindu priest, and he says, "I have room, but I only have two beds. One of you will have to sleep in the barn." Well, the Hindu priest turns to his two friends and he says, "I'm a man of modest means. I'll sleep in the barn." So the lawyer, the rabbi go to a bedroom. 10 minutes later, they hear a knock on the door. It's their friend, the Hindu priest. He says, "I'm so sorry, but there is a cow in the barn. And cows are holy to us, and so I can't sleep in the same area as a cow." And the rabbi says, "You know what? I understand. I'll go to the barn." And the rabbi goes, and 10 minutes later, the lawyer and the Hindu priest hear a knock on the bedroom door. And it's the rabbi. And the rabbi says, "I'm so sorry. I should have thought of this. There's a pig in the barn. And I cannot, due to my religion, sleep in the same area as a pig." And the lawyer says, okay, I'll go sleep in the barn. 10 minutes later, there's a knock on the door, and there are the cow and the pig. Welcome this evening to Attorney Confidential. I'm Neil Kotze.
And I'm Gus Bravo. Thank you once again, Neil, for starting off with us with a great, wonderful joke. For those of you that do not appreciate the humor, you just got to comment. Otherwise, we're going to keep leading off every show with a joke. Welcome to Attorney Confidential.
Hopefully the show won't become a joke, but we will lead off every show with a joke. That is our current plan.
Our topic here today is going to be the public, ironically enough, the public perception of lawyers, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. But before we get to the actual meat of the show, we wanted to first introduce a new segment of the show called For the Record, because I think as lawyers, we always want to make sure we have a very good, clean record. And I'm sure after reviewing the show last week, there are some things that you and I, Neil, want to correct.
Right. I mean, how many times in a courtroom have I said something and then said, "Oh, strike that"? On the radio, we didn't get a chance to do that last week, so this is our strike that moment. I have to give congratulations out to Mike Krzyzewski and the Duke Blue Devils. As I mentioned that I was not rooting for them last week, I said they were playing Kentucky because we were all so shocked that Wisconsin actually beat Kentucky. So that's my one for the record. And my second was I misspoke on the Eat More Kale case I talked about last week, in which we talked about Eat More Chicken versus Eat More Kale. The Eat More Kale people actually did win that case, and I had gotten that backwards. So that's my for the record from last week.
So it wasn't confusing.
Right.
Okay. Well, my for the record is a little bit more personal. It's after my family had a chance to look at the show, my daughter commented that my posture was too stiff and I looked too much like a lawyer.
Right,
frankly.
which is a bad thing.
Yeah.
And for those of you that don't know, this is also being videoed, and so some of you may be able to watch it online. If you aren't watching it or listening to it live, the video is available on YouTube the next day. So our family gets not only to critique what we say, but they get to critique how we do it in our performance, which is we all have families that love to do so. My father said to me after last show, he says, "There wasn't much substance, and Gus was a lot better than you." So that's the way our families are. So
nothing like a criticism from good old dad.
Good old dad.
Well, part of my for the record was not only to try to improve my posture, which sit up straight, but also I think come dress, and Neil, you followed the lead. Come dress in a way I think that is more symbolic or representative of the way we actually appear every day, which is not necessarily wearing a suit and tie because we're most of the time in the office.
Correct. And actually, for those of you that interact with lawyers, a lot of the big law firms now are much more casual than when I started practicing in 1991. We actually had a firm policy that you had to wear your jacket whenever you left your office. So you're in the hallway going to the bathroom. You actually had to have your coat on. But that has changed.
I was in junior prom, actually, when you started practicing law.
Do the age jokes.
And so anyway, the other thing is I want to try to make more eye contact with the camera. And I think we'll try to do that as we go along. Right. But now to the actual meat of the show. Today's topic is the public perception of lawyers, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we thought, what better way to really, what triggers public perception better than movies and TV?
Right, and what inspired this in some ways was I had mentioned a scene from LA Law on last week's show, and then I found out in the news this weekend, Richard Dysart, who played Leland McKenzie, died, I believe, Saturday. And really one of the good lawyers on TV. I think every lawyer that had to work for a managing partner in a law firm wished they worked for Leland McKenzie. I worked for a few that I could only wish were Leland McKenzie. And that's maybe a story for a different day. But
some may be listening to that comment.
Exactly. Thank God I work for myself now. What are they going to do, sue me? Oh, well, actually, I guess they're lawyers. Maybe, but...
So going back to the public perception of lawyers, I think, for most of us, before obviously we got into the practice of law, we always remember the one attorney growing up that we kind of looked at and thought, that's what lawyers do. I think most of the public perception of lawyers tends to be, look, we start off the show with a joke. There's plenty of jokes, unfortunately, about lawyers. Most of them do not paint them in the most positive light. So I think a lot of the public perception tends to be based on a more negative spin to it. But there are some shows, in particular, that I think have painted lawyers in a more positive light. That we'll hopefully get to that. But really, what we want to talk about is let's start with, let's jump right into it. The good. Do you have anything in mind as far as public perception of lawyers that you recall that painted them in a good light?
The thing is that most of the shows talk about lawyers you see as trial lawyers. They're really in the courtroom. You don't see a lot of lawyer shows or shows about lawyers that show the lawyer role as to use the term, the consigliere from The Godfather.
It's a tongue twister.
That is to say that 10 times fast. But Robert Duvall in The Godfather played a advisor and counselor, which is a role that many of us lawyers play, and you don't really see that a lot in the movies. What happens too often is people think of lawyers as the person to get them out of a jam once they're in it, as opposed to someone who can help them prevent getting in that jam in the first place. Right,
especially now with televisions and courtrooms. I mean, the most people, it's obviously the O.J. trial or some of the more prominent trials that you see, and the thought is, well, that's what lawyers do. I know when my kids were asking me what I did, and obviously explaining to what I'm an attorney. Most of their initial images were you get in front of a jury and you argue cases. Yes, but very rarely. Right. I know there was a statistic that we like to quote some of our clients in Dade County. I believe last year in 2014, there were over 66,000 cases filed in the civil division.
And what, with 200-300 go to trial, if I remember correctly?
Exactly. Actually sat a jury, as we know that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to finish it. Right. But that just shows you how few cases actually get tried.
But when we talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, what you see on TV, as with any profession, I'm sure, we could get doctors that critique the med shows, and I'm sure they make mistakes. We were thinking about, Gus and I were talking about A Few Good Men, where the courtroom scenes in there had an example of each of those three.
Right.
The good, one of our favorites, is the redirect of Noah Wiley's character when he's being cross-examined about the Code Red. And it's not in all these books. It's not in all these books. By Kevin Bacon. And Tom Cruise does a great job.
Shockingly that he was in one of those movies.
Well, we can play the Kevin Bacon game on the show, maybe 6 degrees, right? But then Tom Cruise grabs the book out of his hand, goes and asks him, look at the book. Does it say where the mess hall is?
Yeah.
What, wait, it doesn't say where the mess hall is? Well, do you eat? And so that was a pretty good redirect, because one of the things as a trial lawyer is redirects the one thing you don't get to prepare for as much. Right. You got to do that off the cuff.
That's really thinking quick on your feet. Right. And it's also, I think, what they did a good job is he grabbed the book from Kevin Bacon's hands as walking away and used the same tool
Right.
against him, which is a very, very powerful thing, symbolic gesture. So that would be the good. What about the bad?
Well, the bad is it's just it wasn't a real courtroom. I mean, you get the arguing back and forth with witnesses. You get my favorite scene is when Demi Moore objects and she's overruled, and she says, "No, I strenuously object."
Which will never work, by the way.
Right? No, Your Honor. In fact, the actor, who's the actor that
He's the one with the lazy eye.
Pollock. Gets up and says, "Yeah, is that how it works? I object." "No." "Oh, I strenuously object." So that's not how it works.
Right.
And then the ugly goes into the whole arguing scene, although it's everyone's favorite scene in the movie. You do not yell back and forth with a witness, "I want the truth, you can't handle the truth." That would never happen.
Yeah, and you're not going to get that Perry Mason moment either of you blank 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 right. That's the truth. You know, I mean, where Jack Nicholson confesses on the stand, essentially. That just doesn't happen.
I watched Perry Mason every single show. He gets someone to confess. In 25 years of practicing law...
Was it live?
Even I watched Perry Mason reruns, Gus. But it's amazing. In 25 years of practicing, I have once gotten a witness to change and admit that they were wrong.
That's
on the
impressive
stand.
that you actually did it.
It doesn't happen. Most lawyers will not be able to do it. I got lucky, and finally I had a witness say, "Okay, you're right. I don't know what I'm doing." It was an expert that just finally admitted they didn't know what they were talking about.
Yeah, it's you have to understand these cases are prepared for months. I mean, years, and the witnesses are going to be prepped. And you know, when you're cross-examining a witness at trial, the old adage is never ask a question you don't already know the answer to. So most of us, you know, on a cross-examination, we're going to keep it close to the vest and just get in, get out, make our points. A lot of times the best cross is no cross.
And really, going back to the counselor and the thought process of the law, again, I guess you have to have watched A Few Good Men to appreciate what we're talking about. But really, one of the best scenes, and Demi Moore's character picked up on this, was when Tom Cruise asked Jack Nicholson's character to produce the transfer order.
Right.
He wanted to eyeball the witness. He wanted to see his reaction. He didn't need to get the transfer order from Jack Nicholson. And that was a good example of...
It's good lawyering.
Good lawyering.
Yeah, because it's the work you do beforehand. And I know one of the examples that we were talking about earlier, off the air obviously, was the Aaron Brockovich. An example of good movie that really does a good job of showing and demonstrating the work that goes into pre-trial, frankly, pre-litigation, in terms of what most lawyers do, which is roll up their sleeves and get to work.
In many ways, a trial is like a play, and the pre-trial is the rehearsal. Because by the time you get to trial, if people go off script, you have tools to bring them back on script.
Right.
So if you've got a witness that you're cross-examining and he doesn't say what you think he's going to say, you've got tools to get it right.
Right. For those of us just tuning, those of you tuning in, some of us may just be tuning in as well, but you can call in toll-free 1-888-565-1470. This is Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. We're talking today. Today's topic is public perception of lawyers, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I know that there's other movies, other examples. We can come up with a whole host of examples about shows and movies, but I think we agree most of them just show that lawyers and the trial component. And so I think what we want to talk a little bit about today is the reality, and not so much the perception.
Right. The issue there, I think, is, again, that in giving advice to people, one of the things, for example, take the employment context, the area Gus and I do, a lot of people don't pay overtime correctly. And if they would actually come to us and have us audit them, or any other lawyer, not just us, and explain to
We're
them
not
how to
going
do
to
it
plug
right.
ourselves that much here.
No. But that's a way to prevent you from getting sued, to prevent you from going to court and losing, is to have someone give you the advice and have you do it correctly.
Right. Which discussion will continue after the break. Once again, Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil.
Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil is being brought to you by the law offices of Neil D. Codsing and Bravo Law. Bravo Law is a business litigation firm known for providing common sense solutions to small businesses and individuals throughout South Florida. Mr. Bravo is rated AV by Martindale Hubbell and Superb by ABVO. the highest ratings available from these two entities. The law offices of Neil D. Kotze is a litigation boutique with offices in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. Mr. Kotze is a veteran trial lawyer with nearly 25 years of jury trial experience. He is also a two-time recipient of the South Florida Daily Business Review's Most Effective Lawyer Award, a recipient of numerous awards for providing pro bono legal services, and has been recognized by the National Law Council. Call our office, 786-464-0841 or 954-790-6711, and get informed. You're listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. If you have a comment, question, or just want to contribute to the conversation, call the show at 888-565-1470 and share your thoughts on what's going on. Now, back to Gus and Neil for more Attorney Confidential.
And we're back with Attorney Confidential with Gus and Neil. For those just tuning in, again, this is Attorney Confidential. Today's topic is public perception of lawyers, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The first half of the show, we were talking about some of the public perception. I think now we want to touch a little bit about the reality. Anyone who wants to call in, 1-888-565-1470. I think you mentioned it already, Neil, but the consigliere, the Godfather example, I think is an excellent example because here's someone who I didn't realize he was actually a lawyer, Robert Duvall's character, right?
Yeah, I mean, but exactly, and that's really the consultative role, as we call it, is the role.
Sorry.
That's great.
Well, I promise, I'm sorry, the laughter is because I promised my daughter that I was going to send her a little shout out. I couldn't really do it, so I held up a sign that said, "Hi, Sophie, love Dad." And then I put, "What's up, Alec, love Dad."
You could tell we don't rehearse this show because I had no idea that was coming.
Some things need to be more natural.
That was funny. Now I've got a Samantha, Daddy loves you. I just didn't draw something nice with a heart on it for you. But
consigliere.
We're back on track. There we go. We tend to get off track sometimes, but that was
in law school we should try this. In law school, as you can tell, we're kind of scatterbrained, and I'm a part of my study group. Whenever I would get off track, my law school buddies would say Lewis and Clark, sort of get back on the trail. So I don't know. We would have to come up with something to get us back on track. So make sure we stay on point.
Right.
It's only 30 minutes.
Lewis and Clark, and you're telling me age jokes. That goes back way before my time. But
so consigliere, I think it would surprise me about, and this is a testament to Robert Duvall's character, is that the fact you didn't know he was a lawyer. He never bragged about being an attorney.
But he wasn't a good wartime consigliere.
It's getting ahead of the movie.
Right.
But I think the idea is the role that he played was excellent, and it's a good, I think, example of the role that most lawyers play the majority of the time, which is as an advisor, as a counselor.
And I think in some ways it's one of the reasons companies have in-house lawyers.
Right.
A lot of other lawyers, we call them outhouse lawyers for a different reason. But in-house lawyers, it's a reason that I think you see a lot of lawyers on boards. It's not because they're providing legal advice per se. It's because as a lawyer, you learn how to advise and give people just general consultations about business decisions, about things unrelated to whether or not you're going to trial or going to a courtroom. And although you and I, Gus, love to try cases, and it's what we do primarily, there are a lot of roles that lawyers play outside the courtroom that are very, very important.
Absolutely. I think a lot of it we talk about, like preventative medicine. You don't go to the doctor, or you should not hold off going to the doctor until when you have the heart attack or a stroke. You should try to go there a little sooner so they can get you on a plan, etc.
I mean, if you do that, a couple of years ago, I was having left arm pain, and my chest was hurting. And so I drive myself to the little clinic around the corner, and the doctor looks at me and says, "What are you, an idiot? If you're having a heart attack, you need to go to the hospital." Fortunately, it was gas, but nonetheless,
too much TMI.
Was that too much information? But nonetheless, you have to worry about the preventative side of it before you start worrying about going to the surgeon.
Yeah, it's important to. There's certain steps that small business or anybody can take. You're going to enter, for instance, as a small business owner, you're going to hire somebody. You're going to enter into a new commercial lease. You're going to enter into a new contract. You're going to bring in a new partner. Individuals, the same thing. You're going to buy something. You're going to lease an apartment. You're going to sell a house. I mean, a lot of these examples, selling a house, obviously we know we have to go through certain steps, but most people don't think of getting a lawyer necessarily for those situations. And what they unfortunately come to realize is later on, when what hits the fan, and they find themselves either they're owed money, so they have to go after someone, or even worse, they're sued for something, then they have to hire a lawyer. And inevitably what happens is the lawyer says, I wish you had come to me sooner. And you and I
Right.
both get those examples of people
I
say,
wish you'd come to me sooner.
Exactly.
If I had $1 every time I had that. But it is now 20 minutes past the hour, and it's time for a new segment we're going to do every week. My turn to go first. This segment is Did You Know? And Gus, did you know that Howard Cosell was a lawyer?
No, I did not know that.
And
I guess the toupee should have been the
I thought,
giveaway.
yeah, exactly. I thought that was appropriate for this one because a lot of people, Howard Cosell had his moments that he was obnoxious. And,
I guess we have a caller. We have no idea how to handle these things. So there's a
first
John.
caller.
John, you're on the air with Attorney Confidential, Gus and Neil. Go ahead, John. No. Well, John hung up. Neil, are you sure that wasn't you that stepped out of the room and gave the call? In any event, this did you know I wanted to call it a non sequitur because it obviously had nothing to do with anything we've been talking about until this point.
Well, no, I thought mine actually was planned because we're talking about public perception of lawyers, and I'm not sure I made it any better by telling people that Howard Cosell was one. Although Monday Night Football, I liked Howard Cosell.
No, he was good. He was good. My did you know non sequitur comes more from the statistics of the number of lawyers practicing in the state of Florida. Did you know, Neil, that there are 83,267 licensed attorneys in the state of Florida?
I did not know that.
Of which 63% consist of males. Which I still think it's a higher disparity. My law school class, I know it's a few decades after yours, but my law school class was a pretty 50-50 split. So I'm surprised that the female, 37% of them are females. Obviously, that number is climbing as it should. But it surprised me a bit. I thought there would be more lawyers, believe it or not, because there's 20 million total population in the state of Florida, which shows you, it depends how you look at it, right? I mean, there's 83,000. Some people say that's plenty. But that's
it's like you know what happens when you have a bus that's half full of lawyers and goes off a cliff. What the tragedy is?
That's for next week's show. But
that it wasn't full of lawyers. But that's the tragedy.
So back on point, and I think one of the things I wanted to talk about also with the public perception, the reality. I think part of the public perception is not only fed by the movies and TVs and whatnot, but also people's personal experience with lawyers. When you go to see a lawyer and you ask him or her, do I have a case? What do you think of my case? Inevitably, the answer is, it depends, right? Which is, anyone who's been to law school knows that the first thing your professor tells you, you're on your way to a good answer in your law school exam if you start off with, it depends.
Right, and we actually in law school had professors that were depends, but that's a completely different story as well. But
why is it that it's not black and white?
Because it's always gray. And the law, there are some hard and fast rules. If you drive over 55 miles an hour and you truly drove over 55 miles an hour in a 55 mile an hour zone, you are guilty of speeding. Right. There are some laws, criminal laws are pretty hard and fast. Civil law, if you get in a car accident, one person speeding, the other person runs a red light, whose fault is it? You have two people at fault. It depending on how the accident presented itself, who was doing what, who was the last person who could avoid it. In civil law, we always have. It depends.
Right.
And, but we do it too. I'm guilty of it when I play cards and someone says, do you have the flush? It depends. What's your raise? So lawyers are classic.
Well, it's that, but also the laws themselves are not black and white. I mean, you want to, of course, we would always want to strive for something that's clear cut. But unfortunately, there's a saying, good cases make bad laws. And I've been telling you this example earlier where, the recent tragedy with the German Air Wings crash.
Right.
That originated, they made after 9/11, rightfully so, they made the cockpit door basically just foolproof. I mean, you could not get in no matter what. I mean, honestly, there was a little bypass, but it was a fortress, thinking we can keep the bad guys out. never thinking, what if one of the bad guys is already in? In this case, it was the co-pilot that obviously had psychological problems.
Right.
And it's an example of no one thinks when you're passing laws, and obviously legislatures, politicians, a lot of them are attorneys themselves. It's a well-meaning idea. Let's pass a law that protects people. So you pass a law, but then you have to create a whole series of exceptions because life is not black and white. Life is shades of gray. So that's where the lawyers come in to fill in the gray. And clients have a hard time understanding that. They think we're being coy. They think we're trying to hide the ball. The reality is we don't know. We don't know because a lot of it depends on what the client's version, how accurate the client's version of the fact plays out versus the other side, right? There's always two sides to every story.
Well, it's the same thing. How many times, Gus, have you had a client ask you why they have to pay for legal research?
Right.
We have basically in Florida and most states except for Louisiana, which is a code state, we run on case law, and the courts interpret the law on an annual basis. And there are books with decisions. I'll age myself now. We get online and look at them. But we actually do have books that you can go to and Shepherds and look at your cases. But you have to know what the most recent court interpretation of the law is. And that changes a little bit. It doesn't change dramatically, but it changes a little bit. So when you're hiring a lawyer and the lawyer tells you they've got to research it, doesn't mean the lawyer doesn't know what they're doing. There are lawyers who've been practicing 50 years. Got to research certain issues.
Right. And I think the idea is, look, there are plenty out of the 83 or however many thousand, there are a good number, the majority, the overwhelming majority of lawyers are well-intending, good lawyers trying to do their best to advocate for your clients. And so I think we're kind of coming to the close of the show, and I think I'd come to the time where we want to do a takeaway of today. And I think the takeaway would be, look, hire the lawyers early. You'll be surprised of how economical it will be, and frankly, it's going to save you a lot of money down the road.
Think of lawyers. It's like voting in Chicago. Do it early, do it often. But in all seriousness, and this isn't a plug for going out and hiring lawyers. Obviously, you only need one if you have legal needs that require you to hire a lawyer. But don't wait until it's too late.
Right. And so we're coming to the close. Last show we promised you, I think, you laugh, cry, and deep thought. I think it was one of the three things. One of the three things we were able to achieve would be a good show, right?
Hopefully we didn't make you cry on this one. I can't think of anything.
So my deep thought for the day will leave you with a quote from a lawyer himself, Abraham Lincoln, who said, "We can complain because rose bushes have thorns, or rejoice because thorn bushes have roses." And with that, we conclude our show, Attorney Confidential, with Gus and Neil. Tune in again next week.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Attorney Confidential with Gus Bravo and Neil Kotze, two rated AV trial attorneys with over 40 years of experience. Tune in next week for another episode of entertainment, insight, and just plain fun. That's Monday, 6 p.m. on WNN, 1470 AM. See you next Monday for more Attorney Confidential. The opinions expressed on the preceding spot